Je vais me permettre quand même de poser la première question. Hein? What? Yeah, come on. Yeah, please. Tous ceux qui ont envie de rester,
vous
s'il
serez
vous plaît.
plus confortable
venez plus près.
ensemble, tout près? Non?
Shy, maybe, but no. Allez, seulement. Pendant ce temps, pendant que les gens se déplacent, I will start just for one first question, which is very simple, but probably the answer is not so simple as the question. You're co-author of the film. No, well.
Not co.
Okay, but you've written with. So, I mean, the question is, in fact, what was the starting point? Because, in fact, he went there for teaching, and at the same time, the film started at the same time. So, how you did start the film?
So, the idea was to make a film with the students so they could learn how to make a film. He knew that. He didn't know what the film would be about. And my thought was, because neither of us knew the students at all at that point, we hadn't even met most of them. Nick, when he was making 55 Days to Peking, he had a nightmare, a cauchemar, that he would never make another film. He would never finish another film. So my suggestion to him for his storyline was that he address the premonition, which is what he called it, by making this film, and in the course of making the film he would overcome the premonition. This was the very simplistic plot line that was behind his character throughout, and has to do with, if you remember, the Santa sequence, not yet, with the film coming down, and then the eventual hanging.
But then, how did he follow? Because at the same time he met the students, and the students brought obviously other things, other ideas, other desires. So then, how the path?
Well, that's where the journalism comes in. He just began shooting whatever arose that struck him as interesting and recording it. And so there's a tremendous amount of film. If I didn't say so before, he guessed the ratio to be something like 10 to 1. 10 feet of film shot for every one that he used, which is pretty large and also costly, by the way. But that's where the journalistic quality comes in. It was almost anthropological. He was documenting. And his supposition was that at a certain point, a story or the stories would make themselves clear. To be completely honest with you, at the point that this was cut, the stories were not clear. Not all of them. Some of them were, some of them weren't. And I think that's, if you're feeling some confusion at certain points, that's part of it. They were still emerging, and if any of you are engaged with the creative process, and particularly self-expressive creative work, you've probably experienced doing something that, or trying to express something that's very close to you and very deep, and you can't do it until you have a certain distance and a time and space in order to see it shaped properly. So I don't think he had enough of that yet at the point that he cut this. We recut the film with only a fraction of the footage, just for backers in 1976, and the narrative structure was much clearer at that point. And that, by the way, is where the narration comes from in Nick's voice. Originally, the narration was in this version, the narration was in a student's voice.
I don't know if at this point there is already, s'il y a déjà des questions, s'il vous plaît, n'hésitez pas. Shy. Well,
let me just say,
yes, please.
A couple of good friends of mine who wanted to support this endeavor, when they first saw the film, they didn't know what to say to me. And months later, they would say to me, you know, that film stayed with me for weeks. I didn't think I liked it when I first saw it, but it kept living in me. And to be completely candid, that's been my experience, my own experience with the film, that it has a life of its own and it grabs you. But you need a little time to experience that. So if you have nothing to say, I completely understand.
You let me ask you some other things?
Sure.
Another element to say about the structure and let's say this, before going in the stories, was the multiple screen, the effects. When that came in the process, because in fact it came from the different formats you use, or when does it came in fact?
Well, Nick wanted to work in multiple image from the very beginning. He had been experimenting with multiple image already, this was 1971, for at least 10 years. He had done a number of filmed experiments in Belgrade in the early 60s. So his intention to work that way was set from the beginning. And then it was helped along, shall we say, by the kind of equipment that was available, the kind of film that was available. He couldn't always get the 35mm camera, he couldn't always get the 16mm camera from the school, so he had Super 8 cameras, or he did get the 16 but not the 35, so he shot in all different gauges. And he, very soon, very early in the process, he started working with the students with 4 and 5 and 6 projectors at one time, projecting them all against a screen and working to sync them. They'd work with stopwatches. Now, you know, you can do this with a keyboard. But then it was very complex. The projectors kept breaking down. The film kept snapping. It was complex. It was frustrating. So he started working with all the images and trying to work out where to place them and when to place them. And then when they prepared the film for Cine in California, he had these mats, the still images prepared, and they were projected against a screen, and then the moving images were also projected, and then they reshot the whole thing in 35.
But at the same time, when there was the shooting on the mat, because we see some image moving inside, so yeah. They deplace the projector, they move the projector, because sometimes it's tiny, sometimes it's big, so how, I mean, there was an intervention during the shooting of the screen?
I'm assuming so. I wasn't there, and the sad truth is that not very many people can remember exactly how it was done, but it seems that there were I remember, for example, there's one moment when it looks as if the film actually burns and it opens up into a hole through which another image is projected. So it was a kind of spontaneous dance, if you will. I wasn't in California to witness it, but knowing Nick, that's how it happened.
And just a last tiny question about the techniques, and then going back to maybe more the stories, let's say, on the plural. It's Nam June Paik's and the video, because it's also surprising to see all the effects, the works done on the electronic images, and I think it was also using Nam June Paik's synthesizer,
yes,
right?
Yes. In the documentary, if you saw it, you actually heard Nam June Paik's voice as Nick was explaining multiple image to him, and it was his synthesizer. Nick found this colorizing, or solarizing, I guess it's what it's called today, effect, very powerful. He used it, for him it was the equivalent of expressionistic painting. And he was very painterly. He knew a lot about painting, he loved painting, he studied paintings, and I think he thought like a painter. So he would use it to always to augment the human emotion. It wasn't just to make something pretty. He was attempting to push the envelope on the emotion through color. He was, even if you know his classic works only, he was always preoccupied with color and the psychological significance of color, the emotional effect of color.
And when we saw the film, which is also striking, is a contrast of the work. A lot of tracks are going together, obviously, not only screens but tracks, which is part of the traditional, let's say, feature, thriller, noir genre, let's say. This strong part of documentary connected to the riots, to the manifestation. Sorry, I forgot always demonstrations. The other part of always the filmmaking and the possibility or impossibility to do the film connected to his own character. So, did you remember how all those stories, let's say, occurs together and occurs in the working? Do the students want more to do a traditional film? Let's say, going to fiction, going to a thriller, or they were more interested to go to those demonstrations or to talk with, let's say, the master?
I think the students were, first of all, so completely preoccupied with attempting to learn the techniques of filmmaking and to fulfill Nick's intentions. They were working 24 hours a day, often around the clock for 2 and 3 days at a time. They were working like crazy. They were following Nick's lead, basically. They basically turned themselves over to him and trusted he would lead them somewhere.
Moi, j'ai une question. Would he have been interested in the 3D size of screen and technique? Would he have been interested if he had known it? Like, for instance, Wim Wenders used it in his last film about Pina Bausch.
I know that Nick was interested in any new development and how it could be used, not as a gimmick, but as to enhance the expression of humanness in some way. So I assume the answer is yes. Personally, I haven't seen it yet, so I can't say for sure. I can't guess how he might have used it, but he was interested in every possible technique.
Mm-hmm. In the use of space, of l'espace, technique for space.
Well, his background was architectural, so that's a very strong argument for it. Yeah.
Thanks. Other question? D'autres questions? Also in French. She perfectly understands French.
Do you want to share your responses without asking questions? Maybe I have questions for you.
Yes?
I want to know a little more about how he was working with the students, because you said they were following his lead, and so did he have all the ideas about the plots and splitting the screen, etc., or was there a real dialogue with the students? This is one question. The second question is were all the students in filmmaking or also in acting? Because there is this very strong scene shading, and it's very strong for us when we hear Nicholas Ray's voice and giving advices on acting in some ways.
First question first. This is not a plug, it's just the truth. I think if you get a chance to watch the documentary, you'll see Nick teaching and how he worked with the students. As I observed and as they related in the interviews, Nick would simply tell them to set the lights. He wouldn't necessarily tell them how to set the lights. They'd have to feel it out. They'd set them, then he'd say, no good, and they'd have to figure out, they'd have to intuit what he was looking for. It was very frustrating for them, but it was also very, it activated instincts in them, and eventually they figured it out. They had to learn by activating, by bringing to bear all their own inner equipment. Does that answer that question? He was a brilliant teacher, very, very demanding teacher. But he lived with these kids. He turned himself over to them completely. With a great deal of love and a great deal of passion and demandingness. He wanted the best from them. As for the second question, yes, some of them, the way the film was originally set up to work was that each student would work on each position in a film crew for 2 weeks. 2 weeks on camera, 2 weeks on script, 2 weeks doing lights, 2 weeks with the boom, 2 weeks on the tape recorder, like that. So that each person had a sense of what every other member of the film crew was up against. His goal was to create a film crew which demands a level of cooperation and awareness of what's going on around you that you're not born with. You have to develop it, you have to cultivate it through work and experience. So he was working to develop that in them. And then as the film progressed, certain people, it became clear that certain people were good at certain things and were more comfortable at certain things. Certain people were better at acting, enjoyed acting, and didn't like working behind the scenes so much, and vice versa.
But at the same time, the impression that the film gives, for me, at least, I don't know for the others, maybe also your reaction would be interesting to have, but is that the film is really connected to these young people and very connected to their feelings and their life at the same time. So how much, in fact, let's say, the lead and the leader was inspiring himself from the experience of the work he did with them, as you said at the beginning, before the screening. How much this influenced also him in the way he suggests them to go on?
It was definitely a dialogue. The way Nick worked with these people was to ask them questions and to listen to them. And many of these young people, I don't know what it was like for you growing up, but they hadn't been listened to before, not by a grown-up. And somebody they really respected, but Nick listened to them. And he took them very seriously. He related to them as equals. And so yes, he was completely inspired by their experiences. On the other hand, in all fairness, there was only one director. And I don't think there can be any more than one director on a film. That's my guess. I know people have tried with more, but usually it doesn't work. Hmm?
It's true.
Il y a de plus en plus de films réalisés par deux personnes. Hein? Et c'est pas mieux qu'avant, il y avait une personne. c'était très bien. C'est rare, hein. Il y a quand même des cas de 2 personnes, 3. Mais vraiment, je pense qu'il y a une seule personne.
You know, it's like steering a ship in a storm. You need one person who's going to be fully accountable. And I think there's only one vision per visionary. One.
C'est que Louis XIII, c'était quelqu'un qui était fasciné par la jeunesse.
Yeah.
C'était quelque chose qu'il était très proche, très attaché, et il vivait avec les jeunes. Donc je pense qu'en tant que professeur, ça devait être formidable de travailler avec lui, parce qu'il vivait pour ça, vraiment.
I agree. He was an extraordinary teacher. I've had other extraordinary teachers, and they were impressed with him. I mean, including a very highly realized Zen master, thought he was another master. He was a very, very good teacher.
L'autre chose aussi par rapport à la couleur, c'est que un jour, dans Johnny Guitar, qui était tourné dans une couleur de la République, qui était True Color, où il y avait une prédominance de bleu. Et alors lui, il ne voulait pas, il voulait rien de bleu dans le décor, rien. Tout était élevé de bleu. Et l'équipe croyait que c'était parce qu'il n'aimait pas la couleur bleue, ce qui n'était pas vrai. Alors un jour, il arrive sur le plateau et toute l'équipe était habillée en bleu. Comme ça, c'était une sorte de blague, comme ça. Parce qu'ils n'avaient pas compris pourquoi ils ne voulaient pas le bleu.
Do you know why he didn't want blue?
Yes.
Well, the way he would explain it to me, if you have even a little tiny Delft teacup in a scene, in a corner, way off in the corner, it will bleed throughout the frame. And there was a film, another film that we never got to shoot, called, well, it was about a hooker and a lawyer, a prostitute and a lawyer. And there was actually a porn star who was going to play the prostitute, Marilyn Chambers. I don't know if any of you know who she was. And she told Nick, I only look good in blue. So Nick was ruminating on this problem. I can't use blue in a film, it'll turn the whole thing blue. And then he kind of fell asleep over his soup. We were at a restaurant, and then he looked up and he said, we'll shoot the whole thing in blue and we'll call it City Blues.
Yeah.
He was big for working with your limitations and stretching them out. Make your limitations your advantages. So that's what he did. Does anybody want to tell me what you thought of the film? What you felt about the film? You're still here, so you couldn't have been entirely turned off.
Maybe one thing I'd like to ask. I'm impressed by the list of credits and thanks. I just want to know what's the story behind all these famous names we see at the end.
Well, again, a lot of that's in the documentary, but this film was made basically with Nick's salary, my salary as a junior editor, which, believe me, wasn't much, and whatever we could beg. And whenever Nick ran out of money, he would take out his phone book and call one of his old friends from Hollywood and hit him up for money. And some of them came through, and they're listed there. Some of them came through after Nick died, or lent their name or their support. A lot of people put us up or put Nick up at different times, or let him use an editing room, or, you know, you don't do it alone. Some people just drove him places. So anybody I could remember who did anything for this film, I wanted to thank them because they kept it alive.
I was pleased to see the name of Mary Ashton.
Oh, well, Mary. Yeah. Henri's there too.
Henri Langlois, donc, Henri Merceau de la Cinémathèque française, mais je dis pour les autres.
Henri Langlois was the head. very much. It was the heart.
De la Cinémathèque française.
Yes.
Voilà, il faut peut-être le préciser parce que tout le monde ne le sait pas. Je m'excuse, je fais mon travail de pédagogie. Écoutez, je vous propose que ceux qui auraient envie d'exprimer peut-être leur avis un peu plus de façon personnelle, on ne va pas partir tout de suite, donc on a le temps de peut-être échanger hors micro et hors lumière ensemble quelques instants. Et juste avant de clore comme ça cette partie plus officielle, j'aimerais juste encore thank you a lot, Susan,
Thank you.
for everything you
Henry,
did
thank you.
there and coming here. Thank you very much, Susan.